It is the 25th of October 1415. A beleaguered English army stands on an obscure field in northern France. Many are sick with dysentery and all are tired from a long march, but worst of all, they are massively outnumbered. What faces them from across the field sends chills down the Englishman's spine. A massive French army, at least 12,000 strong, stands ready to fight, the cream of French nobility. Heavily armed, they had took the field to rid France of this English menace. This English few, this band of brothers, scarcely number 6,000. By every logical measure, the English should have been wiped out. But by the end of the day, the cream of French nobility lay slain. Against all odds, the English took the field. The fighting elite of France was so decimated, it would take years to recover its former glory, leading Henry V to dictate terms. The battlefield, a sea of mud and bodies. King Henry V had won one of the most famous underdog victories in history, so famous that Shakespeare immortalised the 25th of October 1415 as a play. This is the story of the Battle of Agincourt. On the 21st of March 1413, a 26-year-old Henry V became king. It was plain to see that Henry needed to reassert his power at home and press his claim to the French crown. Henry's right to be king wasn't totally straightforward. Henry was the son of a usurper. Henry's father, Henry Bolingbroke, also known as Henry IV, usurped the throne from Richard II in 1399, leading to political discord and tensions with the nobility. On the other side of the Channel, the French had their own issues. The French King Charles VI probably suffered from schizophrenia and believed he was made of glass. He was quite literally called the Mad King. With Charles VI's affliction, nobles fought for power. It was a great time for Henry to press his claim. Henry demanded significant territories from Charles. Henry wanted to reclaim the land of his predecessors. These demands were refused, so it set the stage for war. Henry landed in Normandy in August 1415 at the head of 12,000 men and quickly laid siege to Harfleur. Harfleur was important to Henry's plans. It was to be used as a base for his up-and-coming campaign. But Harfleur proved to be a tough nut to crack, even though it is believed there was only around a 400-man garrison protecting it. Henry had brought artillery with him, stinking, monstrous objects that must have been truly frightening to the defenders of Harfleur. But they didn't bring the end of the siege closer. Harfleur surrendered within 6 weeks, but it took its toll on Henry's forces. The siege took longer than Henry had expected, giving the French time to muster their forces. But what was more concerning was the amount of men had been lost during the siege. A terrible number of men were lost, up to 5,000. Many died during the fighting, but the big killer was dysentery, which spread like wildfire through the dwindling ranks of the English. It was obvious that the campaign was over. Far too many men had been lost. But how could Henry return home with only the capture of Harfleur to show for it? How could he return home after losing so many men for so little reward? Sure, the sensible option would be to return to England, rebuild his army and return to France better prepared. However, politically this would have been seen as a failure. Not only in France but back home too. There was simply not enough to show for the campaign. Henry came up with an audacious plan, a daring march from Harfleur to Calais, which was also a port under English control. By undertaking this march, it would effectively show that Henry could freely move unopposed, showing he was in control. But it was a gamble that very nearly didn't pay off. Henry left Harfleur on the 8th of October 1415 with around 1,000 knights and men-at-arms and 5,000 archers. The aim was to move fast and be able to slip by French forces, so the English only carried minimal supplies. It became evident from the start of the march to Calais that the English were being shadowed by a much stronger French force. Henry pushed north towards the Somme River, and this is when the wheels started to fall off the wagon. The French had destroyed every bridge or was defending every crossing in anticipation of Henry's forces. This forced Henry further inland, further and further away from Calais and deeper into enemy territory. Travelling light had paid off right up until this point. The army was starting to run out of supplies. After about a week or so, Henry was able to find a crossing over the River Somme, and it couldn't have come soon enough. Henry's men were literally starving. The countryside around them could not sustain them, and supplies were dangerously low. Exhaustion, hunger, and the dreaded dysentery were reaping havoc in the English lines. As if things couldn't get any worse, Henry was soon to receive the news of a massive French army blocking the road to Calais. The French sat in wait at a little-known place called Agincourt. The English army had walked 260 miles in 17 days with only 1 day's rest. Hunger, exhaustion, and the dreaded dysentery meant morale was at rock bottom. The belief was that there was no chance of victory and the French would win the day. This was so believed that the night before the battle, the English confessed their sins to prepare their souls for death. On the other hand, the French camp at the top of the hill was feasting. Bonfires were lit and many played dice to see who could capture who of the English nobility for ransom. Rain came down and the English either huddled together to keep warm or sought shelter in edge bottoms. Under the cover of darkness, Henry sent out knights to survey the battlefield. The field had been ploughed, and with the rain it was getting more and more difficult underfoot. On the morning of October the 25th, the feast of St. Crispin, 1415, Henry positioned his army for battle on a recently ploughed field bounded by woods. Men-at-arms take the centre, flanked to the left and right by longbowmen. The longbowmen have driven 6-foot long sharpened stakes into the ground, creating an impenetrable wall to cavalry. What a sight it must have been to see 20,000 French line up at the top of the hill. All the nobles in their finery must have been a fantastic but terrible sight. The French were squabbling between themselves, so confident of their victory that men pushed to the front, wanted to be the first into action. But the action didn't come quick. Both sides didn't want to initiate the attack. The French, not wanting to give up the high ground, sat there. Time was on their side. They were fresh and fed. On the other hand, the English couldn't afford to sit there. They were hungry, and in their minds they were already dead. With a shout, the English longbowmen pulled out their wooden stakes from the ground, and the whole army advanced up the hill. When they got within 200 yards of the French, the English stopped and hammered their stakes back into the ground. At this point, the English were at their most vulnerable, but no cavalry charge came. With the sharpened stakes now securely hammered into the ground, the French were in extreme range of the English longbow. The longbowmen loosed volley after volley into the French lines. The French, now being peppered by arrows, couldn't stand there taking the punishment. 600 French cavalry thundered down the hill towards the English. The woods on either side of the battlefield naturally funneled the French closer together and towards the English longbowmen on the right flank. The French cavalry take volley after volley of arrows. Horses are falling from under their riders. The noise must have been terrible. The cavalry smash into the wooden stakes. Knights fly from saddles into the midst of waiting longbowmen, who dispatch the knights with brutal efficiency. What remains of the 600 cavalry swing around to retreat to their own lines. Doing so churns up the ground, and out of control they smash into their own advancing knights and men-at-arms. Many are knocked to the ground and struggle to get back up. Eventually, the French organise themselves and continue the advance towards the English men-at-arms. The heaviest of the advancing French were really struggling with the quagmire, and when the French crash into the English step back, but hold steady. Longbowmen pour volley after volley of arrows into the French sides. Men-at-arms are butchered and fall to the ground, trampled underfoot by the men behind them. The second wave of French crash into the back of their own, trying to push them through the English lines. But all they achieve is they put pressure on their own. The French stumble and fall, drowning in the mud, trampled underfoot. The French are in utter chaos, being hacked to death by the English at the front and their own causing the crush from behind. The longbowmen see the chaos. They are witnessing the French being butchered, and they join the fray. They charge the flanks of the French, smashing them over the head and then dispatching them with dagger or pick. The cream of French nobility are stacked up dead or unable to get up to fight on. The battle was effectively over. The French third wave of men-at-arms look down at the carnage and have no will to fight. The English now concentrate on the prisoners, killing the ones too badly injured and sorting the ones out for ransom. But Henry is concerned. A lot of French survivors are making it back to their own lines, and the amount of prisoners now in the English lines that are unbound pose a threat. Cavalry is forming on the hill. Henry has no choice. He orders the death of the prisoners, and they only stop killing when it becomes obvious the French third line isn't going to charge. The Battle of Agincourt was over, and Henry V was the clear winner. The precise number of casualties is unknown, but it is estimated English losses amount to about 400, and French losses at about 6,000, many of whom were noblemen. It left the door wide open for Henry to realise his claim to the French crown, but destiny would play a part in that. Henry V wins the battle, but not the war. This was the Battle of Agincourt.